You're listening to Secure Ventures, the show that follows cutting-edge founders in the cybersecurity space to understand their plights, glories, and revolutionary products. With me today is Balaji Gopalan. Balaji is the CEO and co-founder of MedStack, which is improving the accessibility of healthcare security through an automated deployment platform, MedStack Control. Balaji, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, looking back on your early career, you studied mechanical engineering at the University of Toronto with a long-standing position as a materials science research assistant. Out of school, you then joined Bombardier Aerospace, where you quickly rose through the ranks. What is it like looking back on all that engineering experience?
Yeah, great question. It's funny. I don't know if I've ever been in an interview asked about the work I did in material science. So that's quite amusing that we're going back that far. But I think the best way that I characterize it is when I was younger, I had a great fascination with engineering. It is sort of what I always wanted to do. I liked the process of invention. And I toyed around with some different ideas when I was very young on paper, and I was fascinated by how the things that humans can create can interact with them to help kind of improve their lives. And so I never really wavered from a pursuit of engineering. My first love was aviation, so I did everything I could to kind of chase that as a dream. I was fortunate, just speaking about what you asked about, when I was young, like a teenager, I had some opportunities to, have a bit of a different summer job than a lot of my friends who might have been, wait staff or newspaper delivery or what have you, all the prototypical tropes. But I got to work for a company that was run by a friend of my parents. That was deep in the science realm. Chemistry was never sort of my primary focus, although I did find it quite fascinating. But the biggest thing that I took away from that experience was, just how you need to let your work speak for yourself. Quality is the thing that people will remember, and professionalism. And I had sort of early exposure to that, definitely some bumps along the way, but some good lessons. I guess my claim to fame, that part of my life, was I did get my name put on a scientific paper because I was basically running the lab and running in doing some research in electrified materials, basically is what it was. So that's what I took away from that, was really work ethic and professionalism and project management to a degree. And then, I finished my my degree in engineering, and I found engineering school really challenging. Like much more than I'd expected it to, because I did reasonably well in high school, and so I figured I had a strong academic career in front of me, and pictured myself, doing multiple degrees, standing in a wind tunnel studying aerodynamics. And then I got to university, and I was like, wow, this is really hard. And I worked very, very hard in university. I did pursue things to try and have a bit more of a balanced experience, but the academic performance was really important to me. But as I went through school, I started sort of burgeoning this notion that maybe there was something more other than the technical creation that was in my future. And so what not a lot of people know is, by the purest definition of the word, I've never actually worked as an engineer. I did my internships in science, and then when I got the job at Bombardier Aerospace, which was a tremendous honor. I mean, it was at the time considered to be a penultimate sort of industry force in the Canadian ecosystem. And I got to work on some very, very cool things when I was there, and some stories that I still love to tell. But my job immediately was actually not design engineering. It was manufacturing support. And without getting too, deeply technical, what that means was I was running around on the assembly floor, and airplanes are still built by hand. They're not built by robots like other things are. Working with the hardworking men and women on the shop floor to ensure that they had the things they needed to be able to build the product. And so I developed this really strong affinity for kind of people interaction, which surprised me because I didn't think that's where I would be ending up. And then I saw sort of what engineers did all day, which was, poring over designs and drawings and mathematics and calculations. And I kind of said, I really respect the importance of that, but it's not really what I want to do, although I'd like to work closely with them. So that would put me on a path that would sort of eventually lead me to where I am today.
And that obviously transitioned into you getting an MBA. What was the thinking about getting it at that point in your career?
I mean, if you had told me when I was in high school that, or even earlier, that I would be going to business school, I would have been flabbergasted. It just wasn't my area of thinking at all. And part of that was because I had, perhaps some misconceived notions about what business was. I guess just to jump ahead a little bit, I'm the founder of a company, and I've had a tremendously enriching experience over the last 6 years, but I never had ambitions to do that. It's really more mission driven than anything else. But what happened was when I was at Bombardier, I started in manufacturing support, and then because of the diligence with which I pursued, how managing the transfer of information between people so that they could do their jobs effectively, I was offered an opportunity to join the program management group. And program management, I know that it's a bit of a businessy term that doesn't really mean a lot. What it is in that context is, the organization that's responsible for the success of the product line in its business. Its business life. So, ensuring that risks are managed and plans are established and budgets are set and all these kinds of things at a very detailed level. And that eventually led me to a role in which I was managing the change board. So, in software, we call this product management, and in manufacturing has kind of different names, but same kind of idea where you're making a decision about what the product should be, and you're making financial and technical trade-off decisions with a number of other stakeholders on what gets built and what doesn't get built. And I had the opportunity to do this in a very, very cool context, because this product that was being built was the first jet airplane built by the Toronto division of Bombardier Aerospace. And the first program that was built by multiple companies submitting parts of the design together, which is how other kind of aviation companies, larger aviation companies, have worked for a while. But this was new to Bombardier, and the product itself was really cool. I mean, it was a $50 million business jet, and I found myself moving more and more into a management context. So, like, trying to understand the decisions that were made around market and customers and pricing and forecasting and risk management, and so I started kind of asking a lot of questions and wondering how these decisions are made. Not that I necessarily felt they were always bad decisions, but I just want to understand them so I could defend them properly. Circumstances occurred as they do, and unfortunately, this was at the end of the last millennium, and it got into 2001, and of course, we all remember what happened in September of 2001. And so when 9/11 happened, the aviation industry got completely turned on its head, and very frightening and interesting place to be at the same time. So I took that moment to kind of ask myself, well, maybe it's a good time to go and look inward and develop my skills. And so I decided to pursue a business degree, primarily just to get better at my job. That's really what I wanted to do. I was a manager of a team. I had a team of 6 people reporting to me, and I wanted to be a better manager, and I wanted to be a better contributor to the company. But what I would not predict was all the things. I guess I went in with a mind saying, I don't know what I don't know, so let's learn. All the things that I would learn in that program, which really was a pivotal moment in my life, and had me eventually deciding to pursue something new.
Right. So you mentioned your love of aerospace, and it really shines through as you even talk about some of those past projects that you worked on. So then what triggered that industry switch after business school with your move over to BlackBerry?
I mean, if you want to work in aviation, there's not a ton of choices. And I liked my job. I liked the people I was working with. At the time when I left the company, I was in the head office in Montreal, and I had a great team. I had a fantastic manager and mentor. But I just found myself kind of thirsting to learn new things. And when I did my MBA at Queen's University, which was a lot of fun because I'm originally from Kingston, Ontario, so it was going home for me. I came to learn about the process of strategic marketing, and which is, really this academic mindset around looking at a particular market segment. What do they want to do? How are they trying to do it? And what can you do to make that better? And how do you turn that into a business? And I found this idea really fascinating. And I said, I'd like to pursue that as a career, but I know that in the industry I'm in, things move a little slower. I mean, the product life cycle is 50 years, right? So can I learn as fast as I want to learn in an industry like that? And maybe I should do something different, but I didn't know what. And so I was humming and hawing and thinking about things to do. And I had, timed the other kind of major event in my life around the same thing, which was I got engaged right before my MBA and got married right afterwards. And was wondering what to do. And one of my classmates said, well, what about technology? And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. I don't know much about it. I'm not a software engineer. I taught myself how to code when I was a kid. And I did that and I really enjoyed it. But, I'm not an electrical engineer. And I mean, I was so naive that I actually thought software and electrical engineering were the same thing. And of course, this is 2004, so the world was very different back then. But they said, well, there's this company that's recruiting right now for market strategists. Why don't you apply? I said, sure. And I'd never been west of Toronto. And I'd also never heard of this company that at the time was called Research in Motion. But I was curious about what they were doing. I did some research and I said, oh, they're a cell phone company. Okay, that's interesting. So I've been to learn before I go for this interview. And so I went to a cell phone store in the local mall, a mobile carrier store. And I said, okay, I'm here. Sell me a BlackBerry. And I listened to everything that the salesperson had said. And I said, I have only one context to come at this. I have no industry expertise, no preconceived notions, but I'm just a person who buys a product. What do I understand? What do I not understand? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense about who I am and how they target me as a customer? So I went for my interview. Funny story is because these are the days, of course, before Google Maps and things like that. So I had to rely on a paper map in my glove compartment. I'd never been west of Toronto in a car anyway. And there was an accident on the highway, unfortunately. And so my car got diverted. And I ended up, completely in the wrong place, up in the mountains near Niagara Falls, and it was 2 hours late for my interview. But fortunately, they still accepted me when I went in, and I said, "Look, here are all the things that I've learned about your products and things I think you might need to think about differently," and they gave me the job. And what was fun about that was, at the time, the company wasn't even called BlackBerry yet. It was called Research in Motion, and the product was called BlackBerry. But it was, sold almost entirely into government buyers and central IT purchasing departments of companies for use exclusively by executives. And also, I'd also say almost exclusively in North America. But there was a bunch of firsts that were just happening in the company. So they're starting to look beyond North America. We had some beta testers in Europe. And then perhaps more significantly, there was this idea that if you could sell a BlackBerry device to a company and it would be given to the executives and the executives' lives would become more efficient, what would happen if somebody else saw that and wanted to be a part of the same type of experience, but they didn't have a central purchasing department? And so we were experimenting with this idea of selling BlackBerries through wireless carriers to consumers directly. And it was almost like a secret project because it was culturally so different than what the rest of the company was doing. And that was the group that I joined. So we were a startup in an enterprise, if you will. And I joined as sort of an entry-level product manager. I had to kind of find my footing. It was really strange for me because I'd come from a very different industry. The contrasts are stark. So I'd spent 8 years at Bombardier Aerospace wearing a tie 4 days a week because that's what happens in manufacturing. And, I'd tuck the tie into my shirt and crawl into the guts of a half-built airplane. And then I showed up that way my first day on the job at BlackBerry, and everybody's like, what are you doing, right? And this is tech. We operate differently here. And then, the lack of bureaucracy and red tape and those kinds of things was surprising to me. But I had to kind of find some frame of reference to do my job. And soon I realized that there was things I'd learned before that I could apply, namely around, if you strip away what the product is and the time horizons, the questions are still the same. Who's the customer? What are they trying to do? How are they doing it? How can you do it better? And then all of the mess in the middle, which are channels and, B2B type relationships. And so I started kind of seeing a lot of similarities in the way that we had to manage our relationships with companies like, Vodafone and AT&T and Rogers and others, very similar to some of the things that I'd seen in trying to sell, an aircraft to a fractional ownership company. And I picked up on those things to sort of do what I do. But I had a really interesting opportunity at the beginning because I almost became sort of like a micro manager of innovation. And the question was, we've opened up this channel, but everybody thinks of the BlackBerry as an email device, which is fine for the executives, where the value proposition is, if you can access your email when you're not at your desk, you can be efficient. But what happens when you put it in the hands of a professional consumer? What other things might they want to do? What do we do with this crazy, space age idea of Wi-Fi and a cell phone? Like, nobody had heard of such a thing at the time. And what happens if you have a real-time internet connection, which was the really big hook that BlackBerry had, which was, we were the only cell phone manufacturing company that also had our own infrastructure that allowed us to have a secure connection between the device over the air to a set of servers that were plugged into the internet, which means we could do things that other devices that were going through the carrier infrastructure couldn't do. And if you have that capability, how do you provide some new experiences? So that was what I started researching, which would eventually lead to this project called BlackBerry Messenger.
Wow. Yeah, all over the place in your time at BlackBerry. And you worked there for almost 8 years after working at Bombardier for almost 7 years. And then you left BlackBerry in 2012 and took a few months off to reflect. And after that reflection period, you bounced around several companies.
Yes.
So you then moved between, I think, 5 companies in the next 5 or so years. What really changed in your approach as far as tenure with a company?
Yeah, I don't know if that was really premeditated, but I came out of, I guess, a turning point, in my life, in my career. A bunch of things had changed. So when I first started working for Bombardier, it was like right after school. I didn't do the traveling around the world and backpack kind of thing. I really wanted to pursue a career, and became very focused on just doing my job, and contributing as I could to a larger machine. And if you put the two of those organizations together, that was almost 16 years. And then 1 year in the middle where I did nothing but school. Like I was very, very focused on my education when I did my MBA. And when all that was finished, I found myself in a place where I learned a lot, but it was very difficult to explain what it was, because in 2012, BlackBerry had a bit of a brand crisis, because the iPhone was taking over the world, and we were considered to be yesterday's news. And the tech world was starting to realize that the tastemakers of opinions generally were in Northern California, and down there, everybody said, this Canadian company is yesterday's news, and we shouldn't pay any attention to them. And that's all I knew. And so trying to figure out how to explain that to people, when I look back on my experience and I realized I was good at what I did, but what I was really good at was managing a lot of internal challenges within the organization that had grown very quickly. Pardon me. And then the other thing, major change in my life, of course, was I was a father. And so it took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to do with all that information. And I spent a bunch of time at home. My younger daughter had just been born, and I got to take care of her quite a bit, and reflect on the next thing I want to present myself. And I looked at like, okay, well, I love doing product management. That was the thing I knew. It's like, I really, really love doing product management. Even though, like, I even look at the career I had at Bombardier, and I didn't have the job title of product management, but I was kind of doing that job. And so I said, this is the DNA of all the things I am. I like looking at user problems and market problems and building innovation to address them. But then I looked at, product management had become all the rage now. And so I looked around at the successful product managers around me, and I didn't look like them. They all needed to have like Stanford computer science degrees and things like that. And so it took me a little while to figure out what the right angle was. And then I realized I needed to just do simultaneously some experiments myself, but also just expose what I knew to as many people as I can so I could get their feedback on it and learn how to position it. So, I simultaneously took a new career at an early stage startup, which was a new experience for me, but I do something I wanted to do. And then I also started consulting. And then eventually I started teaching. And in that phase of my career, the teaching was the thing that probably I treasure the most. But it took me a little while to find the right place. And it was a combination of probably two things, one being the type of market we were servicing that had to inspire me. I wanted to solve a problem. So I joined, the story is I joined a stealth, very early startup that was in the sort of consumer media space. And I didn't jive with the culture there. I thought the market problem we were solving, while it was interesting because I'd done messaging stuff before, it didn't feel like it was changing the world. And quite frankly, the founders were, I felt, not fixated on the right ideas. And so we amicably parted ways. And, then I moved into sort of education technology, working with a number of ex-colleagues actually from BlackBerry, which was really fascinating because I was a parent and I was very passionate about education. But again, it was the things that I was good at, I felt like weren't always the best fit in that company, but each one led me to the next. And then, probably the funniest story was how I ended up at NIMI. And that was purely like serendipitous and circumstantial. I was working for Desire to Learn, the ed tech company, and my job there was to launch an app store with a number of other ed tech startups, which we did. And something I was very proud of. And there was one, pretty amazing, prominent early stage ed tech company in Toronto that we were partners with. And then one day I noticed that one of the C-level executives of the startup had moved on to a new career. And when I dug into what he was doing, I realized that it had aligned to a lot of things that I really was hungry to do at BlackBerry, but couldn't do. Not because really of my failing or really the company's failing, just misaligned direction, which is okay. So I met up with him and said, tell me about this new thing you're working on. I hear it's in the personal identity security space. And I find that really, really interesting. I think the ability to have a system that trusts that you are who you say you are and understands what you're willing to give consent to open up convenience around you is really fascinating. And I think we had the potential to do some really interesting things like that with BlackBerry, because I ran a product there called BlackBerry ID. And this company was doing it using a biometric identifier. And he said, when he heard me speak over breakfast, he said, well, all the ideas you've got are kind of where we want this to go. So how would you feel about joining us? And so by the end of breakfast, completely unintentionally, I was working for him. And that individual was Andrew D'Souza, a friend and a mentor, and of course has completely changed the venture world since then with his company Clearbank. And then I joined NIMI, and it was some of the smartest, most tenacious people I'd ever worked with, and it was the mission that I had been trying to pursue. So it took me a couple of years to sort of find my right place. But that's what it was. And then that would eventually lead to MedStack, again, through circumstance. But at the same time of doing all of those things, I'd taken up some consulting work, and I also started teaching, which was a really, again, totally accidental opportunity, but really transformative. I learned a lot about myself. I learned about what I can bring. And it was like that question I'd been asking myself after I left BlackBerry, what can I bring? And I learned it really when I was teaching. And probably one of the things I'm most proud of in my entire career is that some of my students, in the course that I taught, which was an intro to product management course at a professional education institution called BrainStation, have moved on to successful and senior positions in product in some really great companies. So that makes me really, really happy.
So, like you said, in 2015, you then started MedStack.
Mm-hmm.
You had extensive product experience at this point, but you'd never started a company, and you'd never taken on really that CEO role.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? What happened in the early days of MedStack? How did that come about?
Yeah. Again, you can look back and sort of look at your successes and take credit for them and say, I knew what was going to happen, but that's not always the most honest thing to do, and certainly wouldn't be in this case. Again, I had not really thought about becoming a founder. It wasn't the thing that I pictured myself doing, partially because of, I think, two things. The first being, when I was younger, I wanted to be a builder more than a leader, for lack of a better word, although leadership was something I realized I could do pretty early on. And then secondly, I really, really liked being part of a larger force. I never felt like bigger companies are better than smaller companies or better than bigger companies, what have you. It was more just, is the organization being innovative, and can you be a part of that? But while I was at NIMI, again, the stars had aligned, right? So we were preparing to launch the developer program. So tools we could give to software engineers at other companies who could then, build things using our capability. This idea of platform business always seems to open up career opportunities for me, because that's what led me to NIMI from D2L. And then at NIMI, we ran this little hackathon contest on a weekend with some pizza and beer, and invited some developers to just build some stuff that we could use for marketing collateral, really more than anything else. And this one individual from the community came and built something really interesting, and I befriended him that night because I was just fascinated by the way he thought about users and problems and markets and the application of technology. And he himself was there under complete false pretenses, or I should say mistaken pretenses, because he actually thought that NIMI was a healthcare product, even though it wasn't. It was an identity and security product. And he was fascinated in digital health. And so a few months later, almost a year later, I left that company because of, again, on amicable terms, but the company had sort of shifted direction. And he found out, he called me, he said, I'm launching a new startup. Do you want to run it with me? And my reaction was, well, I'm honored you're asking me, but sort of why me, and I never really thought about doing this. And he said, it has nothing to do with your job titles or experience or any of that other stuff. It's because you really care about the power of platforms, and you've done that your entire career. And I have a major platform problem I'd like to bring to you. And I realized that I can't do this alone. I need a business partner. So I met him for a drink, and he told me about this idea that people who are building software in healthcare actually have a lot of trouble commercializing and expanding, because they have a massive barrier or a mountain of work in data security that they have to handle. And it's really the same work every time, and they have no expertise on how to do it. And I reacted to him the similar way that I get a lot of reaction, which is like, you got to be kidding me. That doesn't exist. And he said, no. And I've seen it firsthand, because he was running a software development agency that was building healthcare apps. And so we decided to pursue it. And, one part of the story that not a lot of people know is that I wasn't the CEO in the beginning. He was, and I was the head of business development, if you will. And it would only be a year later or a year and a half later when we decided to pursue MedStack as a full-time concern, because we just knew we were onto a really important problem that needed solving. And if we didn't do it, how long would it be before somebody else decided to pursue it with the passion that we had? A year and a half later, we were meeting with the mentors at an accelerator that we were at, and they said, "Which one of you is the CEO?" And I said, "Well, he is." And they said, "Well, why are you doing all the talking?" And we realized I was the pitch person. And so we had a heart to heart and decided to shift roles. And I mean, so much of what MedStack is based on, I think, a really good collaborative relationship between Simon and myself.
So when you started MedStack, it sounds like you were somewhat of a security novice as well as a healthcare novice.
Mm-hmm.
How did you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I was less of a security novice than a healthcare novice.
Sure.
But you know, again, I never claimed to be eminently technical. The things I drew upon were some experience I had with how to position and talk about security and how people like to use it, because BlackBerry at its core was a security proposition. NIMI at its core was a security proposition. But they weren't like selling security. They were just using security to deliver other things. And that's something I really latched onto, because I realized at the end of the day that the security community often makes this mistake and says, buy us because we have the best security. And unfortunately, from a positioning perspective, security itself it carries the most weight when it's implemented in its core as part of a larger value proposition. And that's the story that I like to tell. But I have family members who are in healthcare, and you know, my parents were getting elderly, and I was seeing their healthcare experiences. And I said, you know, I've not been a founder myself, but I've mentored a number of them, and I've seen them, and I've done diligence and acquisitions and things like that. And founders work really, really, really hard. I mean, they're much easier lives. You don't do this for the money. You don't do this for the comfort. You do it because you believe in the mission. And so shouldn't we make it easier for founders who are pursuing such an important mission, like making healthcare work better? And of course, this is 5 years before COVID happened, so I couldn't have predicted where we would end up. Should we make their lives better and easier? And so that's what motivated me to do this. And I just kind of went in knowing I didn't know all the things I didn't know, and was looking to learn wherever I could. And I said, I'm going to take advantage of that, which is a tool I'd always used in my career. When you don't have expertise, that's not a bad thing, because what you can do is that enables you to ask the questions that other people who don't have expertise also need asking. So if I had to develop a level of knowledge that I could simplify for my simplistic mind, then I would be able to deliver that messaging to external people who were also new to this very interesting space that we were in, whether they're customers or investors or, potential employees or what have you. And so I made it my mission to kind of simplify the things we were thinking to a world that didn't get it. And at the time we created MedStack, like, HIPAA compliance was such the realm of highbrow, expensive experts just in that field. Like, there was no way to do it unless you paid somebody a lot of money who would deliberately make everything look complicated on purpose, so they could justify charging you a lot of money, whether they're privacy lawyers or other such people. And we said, we got to democratize this for everybody. And let's start by understanding we don't know everything, and simplify it as much as possible. And I leaned on all the tools I'd ever used, whether that was, understanding, working with aerodynamics engineers at Bombardier, or working with, software developers at BlackBerry, or working with, or even, more infrastructure managers at BlackBerry, or electronics engineers at NIMI, or what have you. How do you translate that into a language that the world can understand? And that's kind of really what I leaned into, and I still do today.
And after you took over as CEO, How do you feel your background in product management kind of influenced your approach as CEO and driving the company?
Very, very deeply. I am more convinced than ever that product strategy is the core of entrepreneurship. It isn't everything. There is a difference between a founder and a product manager, but I think product managers are some of the people that are best suited to eventually becoming founders. Because if you don't understand the product question, the other stuff isn't going to matter as much. And again, the product question, going back to the kinds of things I teach and mentor around, is who do you care about specifically? Like, get as specific as you can. What are they trying to do? How do they do that today? Why are they frustrated by it? And what do you have that can make that different? And I don't even think we've nailed it all at MedStack yet, but we're asking ourselves that question every single day. And everything I do or think about in product, I've been trying to instill in the company, even to the degree of us eventually hiring our own product manager, which took a long time. And we have an incredible one in Marcus Polini, who, bless his soul, he's been taking everything I've been saying and implementing it into the company. But every time we get a new piece of information, whether that's industry news, technology evolution, competitive analysis, feedback from a customer we won or customer we didn't win, or customer we won and then lost, all of that is product data. And I feed that back into the organization and say, what can we learn from this? And how do we need to think about things differently? What are the boundary conditions of everything we need to do? Where do we need to push harder? Where would pushing harder just be pushing harder for its own sake? And good enough is good enough. I'm really a big fan of this framework that I've introduced to the company, and we use in a lot of things that I learned from another product manager I worked with many years ago, called the Kano model. And what the Kano model says is that everything you do can either be something where if you don't have it, you can't compete, but if you have it better than anybody else, nobody will care. Or if you don't have it, you can still compete, but if you do it better than everybody else, it's the one thing everybody will remember and thank you for. Or in the middle, which is something completely linear. And every feature of every product or every proposition of product you think of falls in one of those three things. And so these are some of the things that we apply to all of our thinking around prioritization, messaging, focus, sales script, customer risk, budgeting, forecasting, et cetera.
Interesting. And given this focus on product, how has the product itself actually evolved over time since the early days of MedStack almost 6 years ago now?
Quite a bit. I mean, we've done something in our company that is considered to be a death knell for a lot of companies at our stage, and very few can survive it. I think we've survived it. Obviously, it's a startup, so it's a different day every day. But we did a major product pivot in the early days of our company, meaning we had one product for the first 3.5 years and another product since then. But the reason that was possible is because we took lean startup to heart. And that's harder to do in some industries than in others. Some people might suggest that it's really hard to do in security, but it doesn't have to be. Lean startup simply is around putting the idea in motion that says you understand the limitations of what you have, and you're very transparent about them. And then you just, with that as a foundation, then you pursue every piece of learning you can possibly get. And it was really, I got to credit Simon for this. It was really his idea that said, and I'd come to it from worlds of being surrounded by lots of big engineering teams. So I was like, what are we building? He's like, we're not building anything. We're going to put this into market, even if we have to do it manually. And of course, years later, I would learn that some of the best companies in the world have done that. And so we actually got to revenue very, very quickly in a very non-scalable manual way. It's almost like we had a services play that we were selling as a SaaS product, partially because he was running a services company before. So we went in and we configured security because we knew a little bit about security in the infrastructure. Or I should say he did. We configured security in the infrastructure and then wrote up the privacy policies and said, here to our customers, it's all done for you. And then the purpose of that, which I don't know if we would have probably articulated that way at the time, but it definitely was the truth, was learning whether people cared. That's what it was. Like, did it matter? Did the founders of other digital health companies go, oh, thank you for doing that for me? Were we able to go to their customers, the hospitals, insurance companies, and go, here's how this company's doing security? And they say, great, you've done it correctly. And so we did that for a few years, and we learned a lot of information. Not all of it good. We lost some customers. We had people pressure us on pricing. We won some customers, and then they paid us happily, and we found out we didn't really know why they were paying us. Even they didn't know why they were paying us. And we took all of that data, and in 2019, I would say, end of 2018, 2019, shortly after we did our seed financing, we applied all of that to a completely new proposition, which was 100% a rebuild from the ground up, which is a current product, MedStack Control, that answered all of the gaps that we felt existed in the previous proposition. And that was done from a product perspective. So, we had a pretty successful 2020 in a lot of ways. And when I reflect on it, which I mentioned in our blog post and sort of year in the review,
Yep.
As a product manager, it was hard for me to ignore the fact that what we'd actually done was pivoted on the 4 Ps of product and marketing. And so, we knew we'd proven the market proposition, and then we understood why the product in response to that proposition previously was limited. So we changed the product, and we were doubling down on the new product. We changed the way we priced the product because it wasn't priced properly. It wouldn't scale as customers were successful and in the way that they could use it and realize value. So we introduced some new pricing, which actually worked much better for that. We shifted away from describing what our product was technically, which is, we have, and sorry, I shouldn't even say technically, describing our product as a function of the number of engineering hours put into the product. Let me put it that way, which is now I realize a mistake a lot of founders make. You want people to recognize your hard work. So you go, we spent the most amount of time building infrastructure orchestration, the tools that tell the servers how big they have to be. So that's what people want to pay for, which is what we used to say. And then people would kind of go, yeah, but I don't understand why you're so much more expensive than Amazon. And we said, well, no, we're sitting on top of Amazon or Microsoft or what have you. And so we shifted our position. We say, no. The thing you're paying us for, what you value, because we asked ourselves, why did people value us and why did they not value us? And we teased all apart to a new positioning statement that said, we are compliance automation. You need to be HIPAA compliant. We automate that whole thing. We're not going to teach you how to do it. We'll automate it for you. By the way, you realize that automation through infrastructure, but we're an automation company. And then with that stronger messaging, we made the change to the final P, which is that we doubled down on content and messaging and referrals and said, customers should come to us when they're ready. We shouldn't go and try to push ourselves on people. And so we shifted from an outbound to an inbound strategy, and all that it's very product thinking, and it led to sort of where we are now.
And before we wrap up, I have to ask about your role as a mentor. You currently serve as a mentor for 3 different organizations. What inspired this focus on mentoring and your own kind of giving back to the community?
Somebody had asked me not long ago how that started, and I actually don't remember. But what I can say is it's been an extremely enriching experience. I really enjoy it. Sometimes you sort of realize that the best satisfaction you get out of your work is based on the results that other people can deliver based on the stuff you've given them. It's almost like technology platform thinking, but instead of the technology being the platform, I made myself a platform. I said, a platform enables another entity to be more successful, whether that's an API or what have you, or a distribution channel or knowledge. And so I said, if I myself can be a platform, what does that mean? And my work particularly at BlackBerry, I had a few people I worked with there who told me that their careers were shaped thereafter by working with me as a mentor or a direct manager. And I said that's got to be worth something. So can I do more of that kind of thing? If I can make more people successful, why don't I do that? So that would eventually lead into the teaching gig, which itself was successful. And so through the teaching gig, some of my former students went to these accelerators and incubators and said, every time I had a question, I picked up on the things that Balaji would teach me, but then I'd give him a call and say, am I understanding this correctly? Is this how I apply it? And he gave me the time. And I think you have a tremendous benefit by bringing him on as a mentor. So I was invited at first by the DMZ, and then eventually, I'm working with a number of other organizations, the Biomedical Zone and Techstars and Founder Institute, H2I, and it's been beneficial because it's helped give me an opportunity to tell the story of my company. We recruit, so it's a bit of recruiter marketing. As well, some of the people that I mentor themselves are or know digital health founders, and so there's opportunities for my company as well. We are an organization that does multiple things: our technology, our channel, our brand, our partnerships, our time outside of the company towards helping entrepreneurs solve the world's biggest problems and be successful doing it. That's what I care about, and so this is part of that.
Yeah, I think it's great. There's obviously a number of people who can benefit from that experience and all your learnings over your career. So finally, what's next for you and MedStack looking ahead?
What the world has faced in the last 9-10 months has been in a lot of ways pretty horrible. We've all known people that have been affected by it, economically or personally or or in their health or worse. It's been a terrible reckoning for modern society. But I guess if there's anything, I'm thankful to be working in an industry and working with people who can address it or do something about it. And so, first thing I guess I would like to say is to anybody listening who works or supports or is involved in healthcare or in other ways of keeping our society running successfully today. I'm very appreciative of what they do and take it very seriously and thank them for their efforts. But because we've found ourselves in the sudden thrust into the spotlight of digital health, all of us working in digital health, well, I shouldn't say all of us, my customers who work in digital health for years have known this is the way that things should go. You don't always need to be sitting in a crowded emergency room in a hospital. You can get the care you need through home monitoring, through intelligent devices, through telemedicine. Data in healthcare should be fluid and of course, highly secure and associated with the patient, no matter where they get care from. These are a number of things people have been saying for a long time, but the industry has been very slow and faced a bunch of inertia around adopting it, and now it's been forced to. I read a great statistic a week ago that said that in the total number of insurance claims, health insurance claims in the US, virtual care used to be like less than 0.5%. And then in April, it jumped to about 14%, and it's settling somewhere around north of 6%, which is 6% doesn't sound like a big number, but it's way bigger than 0.5%. And so that, digital health has enjoyed its best 12 months of venture investment ever. This industry is now at the forefront. Healthcare must move to the cloud. Data must be secure. These things are not open to debate or compromise. And so I think we have a very busy year ahead of us. I think my customers have a very busy year ahead of us. And we have some cool things planned. I won't give too much away, but there's some interesting new announcements that will be coming from MedStack in the next 1 to 2 quarters around new capabilities that forward the experience for our customers. I'm interested in pursuing partnerships, channel partnerships, and other such opportunities to take our story even further. So I think it's going to be a pretty big year for us.
And for our listeners, are you currently looking for investment or hiring?
Yes to both. So we are speaking to a number of investors about a new round of financing into MedStack, picking up on, again, validating our market proposition in 2017 and 18, putting together a strategy in 2019, building the right product last year, and now scaling it. Those conversations are interesting. We find from an investor perspective, the seed, post-seed, cybersecurity, enterprise, SaaS type investors, developer tools investors are probably the best fit for us. Although we're very interested in speaking to those interested in digital health because we can help their other portfolio companies be successful in solving one of the biggest challenges they'll face. We are also growing the team. We'll be recruiting probably in almost every role in MedStack. Currently looking for a sales lead. So somebody used to the startup journey because we're a startup, but also our customers are startups, and sort of B to SMB SaaS sales is sort of the hook. Doesn't need to be healthcare, doesn't even need to be security, but those are the things that we're passionate about. We're also looking to hire in our engineering team, so full stack developers with a bit of a tilt in their hat towards security is always appreciated. So certainly head over to medstack.co and you'll see our postings there, and happy to chat with anybody interested.
Perfect. Thank you again for your time, Balaji.
Thanks very much, Kyle. Really appreciate you putting the show together, and definitely looking forward to working with you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can write to me at kyle@secureventures.io. I'm Kyle McNulty, and you've been listening to Secure Ventures.